Alright, so let's get into something wild. We're going to dive deep into the world of the Yakuza, but not the romanticized movie version. We're talking about the real deal, the guys at the top, the shot callers who built and ran these massive criminal empires in modern Japan. This isn't just about tattoos and missing fingers, it's about power, money, and influence on a scale that's hard to even wrap your head around. We're gonna count down some of the most notorious Yakuza bosses, guys who were legends in the underworld. These aren't just random street thugs. These are the men who shaped Japan's criminal landscape from the chaos after World War II all the way to the present day. They were strategists, politicians, and sometimes absolute monsters. Their actions didn't just stay in the shadows. They spilled out and had a massive impact on Japanese society, business, and even international politics. Law enforcement spent decades trying to dismantle the empires these guys built, and in many ways, they're still dealing with the fallout. So, what we're going to do is a straight-up, no-nonsense look at who these men were. We'll explore their rise to power, the empires they controlled, and the legacies they left behind. Some were brilliant, some were brutal, but all of them were fascinating figures who operated in a world most of us can't even imagine. We're pulling back the curtain on the real godfathers of Japan's underworld. It's gonna be a wild ride. So, to kick things off, you got to start with a guy who was a total anomaly, a real powerhouse right after the war. His name was Hisayuki Machii, but they called him the Ginza Tiger. What's crazy about him is that he wasn't Japanese by blood. He was Korean-Japanese, born Jonggyeon-yong. In a society as homogenous and, let's be honest, often xenophobic as post-war Japan, for a guy of Korean descent to rise to the top of the criminal food chain, that's just an insane testament to how formidable he must have been. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a kingpin in a time of total chaos. Machii didn't mess around with old-school Yakuza traditions. He founded his own organization, the Toseikai, which translates to the Voice of the East Society. This wasn't your typical bakuto or gambler or tequila peddler gang. The Toseikai was a modern, brutal, street-fighting force made up of other Zainichi Koreans and Japanese outcasts. They took over the high-end Ginza district, which was like the Beverly Hills of Tokyo. While other gangs were stuck in the past, Machii was looking at the future, controlling everything from protection rackets to nightclubs and import-export businesses. He saw where the money was, and he just took it. His real genius, though, was in his connections. He became this legendary fixer, a guy who could bridge the gap between the underworld and the legitimate world. He was tight with powerful figures in both Japan and South Korea, acting as a secret channel for political and intelligence agencies. The CIA even had a file on him, calling him a major figure in their anti-communist operations in Asia. Think about that for a second. This guy wasn't just a mob boss. He was a player on the geopolitical stage, a criminal with a hand in international espionage. The Toseikai became so powerful and so notorious for its violence that the police were forced to crack down hard. Machii eventually disbanded the gang in the mid-60s, but that was just a smokescreen. He transitioned into legitimate businesses, becoming a tycoon in tourism, ferries, and real estate, all while maintaining his underworld influence. He essentially laundered his entire empire, showing everyone a new way to operate. He was a pioneer in that sense, blurring the lines between crime, business, and politics. Machii's legacy is immense. He showed that you didn't need to be part of the established Yakuza clans to build a massive criminal enterprise. He created a blueprint for a more corporate, internationally connected form of organized crime. He was one of the first to truly exploit the post-war Reconstruction boom, and his influence lingered for decades, a ghost in the machine of Japan's economic miracle. The Ginza Tiger wasn't just a boss, he was an architect of the modern underworld. Now we get to the guy who is, for all intents and purposes, the godfather of the Yakuza, Kazuo Taoka. This man is a legend. They called him Kuma, the bear, because he was known for clawing out an opponent's eyes in a street fight. That tells you everything you need to know about his approach. He wasn't a politician, he was a warrior. Orphaned at a young age, he joined the Yamaguchi-gumi in Kobe as a teenager and quickly made a name for himself as a ferocious and fearless brawler. He was old school to the core, a true believer in the Yakuza code of jingi, justice and duty. In 1946, at just 33 years old, Taoka became the third kumicho, or supreme boss, of the Yamaguchi-gumi. At the time, it was just a small local gang of dockworkers in Kobe with maybe a few dozen members. But Taoka had a vision that was bigger than anyone else's. He saw the potential to unify the scattered warring factions of the Japanese underworld under one banner. His mantra was simple: build the Yamaguchi-gumi into a family, a corporate-style organization that would dominate everyone else. And that's exactly what he did. Under Taoka's leadership, which lasted for 35 years, the Yamaguchi-gumi went through an explosive expansion. He was a master strategist. He established a rigid hierarchy, created legitimate front companies in construction, entertainment, and talent management, and absorbed smaller gangs through a mix of ruthless violence and shrewd alliances. He famously banned his members from using or dealing drugs, which was a genius PR move. It made the Yamaguchi-gumi seem like a humanitarian organization, protecting society from the real evils, while they were busy running every other racket imaginable. Taoka's life was pure gangster movie material. In 1978, he was at a nightclub in Kyoto when a rival from the Matsuda-gumi shot him in the neck. The shooter was trying to avenge his own boss, who had been killed by the Yamaguchi-gumi. Taoka survived, which only added to his legendary status. The retaliation was biblical. The Yamaguchi-gumi hunted down the shooter and waged an all-out war that cemented their dominance. Taoka ruled with an iron fist from his compound, a man feared and respected by everyone, including the police, who often seemed powerless against him. By the time he died of a heart attack in 1981, Kazuo Taoka had transformed a small portside gang into Japan's largest and most powerful criminal syndicate, with over 10,000 members. He created the modern Yakuza as we know it, a sprawling corporate behemoth. His funeral was a massive public event, attended by gangsters, celebrities, and politicians, all paying their respects. He wasn't just a boss. He was an emperor who built an empire that would outlive him and continue to shape the destiny of Japan's underworld for generations. After Taoka, the game started to change. The Yakuza began to look less like street gangs and more like Wall Street firms. The perfect embodiment of this shift was a guy named Susumu Ishii. He wasn't just a gangster, he was a full-blown tycoon, a financial predator who almost brought Japan's economy to its knees. Ishii was the second-generation head of the Inagawa Kai, Japan's third-largest syndicate, but his real power wasn't in his fists. It was in his understanding of money. He was the man who took the Yakuza into the bubble economy of the 1980s. Ishii was an old-school Yakuza who had done his time, serving a long prison sentence. But when he got out, he saw a new world. Japan was awash in cash, and the stock market was going insane. He realized that the real money wasn't in shaking down noodle shops anymore. It was in corporate raiding, stock manipulation, and real estate fraud. He became the face of the Kizai Yakuza, the economic gangsters. He didn't need to break legs. He could just break companies. His masterstroke was his involvement with some of Japan's biggest corporations. Ishii set up front companies, and with billions of yen in loans from legitimate banks, He started buying up massive amounts of stock in major companies like Tokyo Corporation. He then used his underworld muscle to drive up the stock prices. He was also a king of Sokaya, a uniquely Japanese form of racketeering where gangsters buy shares in a company just to disrupt shareholder meetings and extort money from the executives. Ishii turned this into an art form. The whole thing came crashing down in spectacular fashion in the early 1990s. The bubble burst, and Ishii's web of fraudulent loans and shady deals was exposed. It led to one of the biggest financial scandals in Japanese history, implicating top executives at Nomura Securities and Nikko Securities, two of Japan's largest brokerage firms. They had been secretly financing Ishii's schemes. The scandal was so huge it sent shockwaves through the global financial system and forced Japan to finally pass serious anti-Yakuza legislation. Susumu Ishii died in 1991, right as his empire was collapsing, but his legacy was profound. He showed just how deeply the Yakuza had penetrated the legitimate Japanese economy. He wasn't just a crime boss, he was a key player in the financial markets. His story is a cautionary tale about what happens when organized crime gets a seat at the corporate table. He modernized Yakuza finance, but in doing so, he also exposed its greatest vulnerability and triggered the crackdown that would change the game forever. After the chaos of the bubble economy and the death of the old guard, the Yamaguchi Gumi, the biggest ship in the Yakuza fleet, was in trouble. They were facing internal power struggles and a massive government crackdown. They needed a new kind of leader, not a brawler like Taoka or a financier like Ishii, but a diplomat, a stabilizer. And that's exactly what they got in Yoshinori Watanabe, who became the 5th Kumicho in 1989. This guy was the opposite of the stereotypical flashy boss. He was low profile, calculating, and incredibly effective. Watanabe's rise to power was a story in itself. He came from the Yamaken Gumi, a powerful faction within the larger Yamaguchi Gumi. His predecessor had been assassinated, sparking the bloody Yamaichi War, the most violent gang war in Japanese history. The syndicate was fractured and bleeding. Watanabe's first job was to stop the killing and stitch the organization back together. He was a master of internal politics, forging alliances and bringing rival factions back into the fold. He was less of a warlord and more of a CEO managing a deeply dysfunctional corporation. His reign coincided with Japan's lost decade, the long economic recession of the 1990s. The old rackets were drying up. The government's new anti-Yakuza laws were biting hard, making it illegal for companies to do business with them. Watanabe had to adapt. Under his leadership, the Yamaguchi Gumi diversified its portfolio even further. They moved away from high-profile crimes and delved deeper into sophisticated financial fraud, IT-related scams, and quietly taking over struggling businesses during the recession. They became leaner, meaner, and smarter. Watanabe was also a pragmatist. He understood the importance of public perception. He tried to project an image of the Yamaguchi Gumi as a more disciplined, less violent organization. During the devastating Kobe earthquake in 1995, the Yamaguchi Gumi, under Watanabe's orders, was one of the first and most effective relief organizations on the ground, handing out food, water, and supplies, long before the government even got its act together. It was a brilliant PR move, a way of saying, see, we're not all bad, we take care of our own. Watanabe ruled for 16 years, a period of relative stability and quiet expansion for the Yamaguchi Gumi. He successfully navigated the syndicate through one of its most difficult periods, weathering economic collapse and legal warfare. He was forced into retirement in 2005, reportedly due to health issues, but many believe he was pushed out by a more aggressive faction. His era represents a crucial transition for the Yakuza, from the excesses of the bubble to the stealthy corporate survivalism of the modern age. He was the quiet boss who kept the empire intact. So after the quiet diplomacy of Watanabe, the pendulum swung hard in the other direction. In 2005, Kenichi Shinoda, also known by his underworld name Tsukasa Shinoda, took over as the sixth Kumicho of the Yamaguchi-gumi. And let me tell you, this guy is a different breed. Shinoda is a hardliner, a man known for his ambition, his strict discipline, and his history of violence. He came from the Kodo Kai, a Nagoya-based faction notorious for being one of the most brutal and financially savvy groups within the syndicate. His ascension marked a radical shift in power. Shinoda's philosophy was aggressive expansion and modernization. He wasn't content with just maintaining the empire. He wanted to grow it. He famously moved the Yamaguchi-gumi's base of operations from its historic home in Kobe to his own turf in Nagoya. This was a massive power play, a signal to everyone that the old guard was out and the Kodokai was now running the show. He demanded absolute loyalty and, more importantly, a huge increase in the monthly dues that subsidiary gangs had to pay to the headquarters. This did not go over well with many of the older factions. The guy is no stranger to the law. A few months after becoming the top boss, he was sent to prison for 6 years on a firearms conviction from the 1990s. Think about the stones on this guy. He knew he was going to prison, and he took the top job anyway. He ran the entire Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest criminal organization in Japan, from a prison cell. He appointed a loyal deputy to manage things on the outside, but everyone knew Shinoda was still calling the shots. His time inside only seemed to harden his resolve. When Shinoda was released from prison in 2011, it was a media circus. He came out with a clear agenda: reassert his authority and push the Yamaguchi-gumi into the 21st century. Under his leadership, the syndicate has become more like a global mafia. They've been sanctioned by the United States Treasury Department for their involvement in international drug trafficking, money laundering, and human trafficking. Shinoda has pushed the organization to be more sophisticated, using complex financial schemes and cybercrime to generate revenue, making them harder than ever to track. Shinoda's aggressive tactics and the centralization of power and money in the hands of his Kodokai faction ultimately led to the biggest crisis in the syndicate's history. In 2015, his leadership style caused a massive schism, with over a dozen major factions splitting off to form a rival group. This triggered a new gang war that continues to this day. Kenichi Shinoda is arguably the most controversial and transformative leader since Taoka, a modern tyrant who, in his quest for absolute power, may have planted the seeds of the Yamaguchi-gumi's own destruction. In the Yakuza world, there are tough guys, and then there are guys who are just on another level of terrifying. Tadamasa Goto was one of those guys. He was the founder and boss of the Goto-gumi, a powerful but notoriously violent faction within the Yamaguchi-gumi. Goto was a man whose reputation for pure, unadulterated brutality was legendary even among other hardened gangsters. His crew was known as the Syndicate's shock troops, the guys you called when you needed a problem solved with extreme prejudice. They were feared throughout Japan. Goto was the classic Yakuza enforcer. He wasn't a diplomat or a financier, he was a warlord. His rackets were brutal and direct extortion, loan sharking, and taking over businesses through sheer intimidation. His name was linked to countless acts of violence, including the infamous 1992 attack on the film director Juzo Itami, who had made a satirical film mocking the Yakuza. 5 of Goto's men slashed the director's face. That was the message he sent to anyone who crossed him. He operated with a level of impunity that was shocking. But the story that made Tadamasa Goto an international name is just unbelievable. In the early 2000s, he was suffering from severe liver disease and was denied a transplant in Japan because of his Yakuza status. So what does he do? He makes a deal with the devil, or in this case, the FBI. In a secret arrangement, Goto and several of his associates provided the FBI with information on Yakuza activities in the United States. In exchange, the FBI helped him get a visa and a spot on the transplant list at the UCLA Medical Center in 2001. Think about the audacity of that. A top Yakuza boss, one of the most violent men in Japan, sells out his own organization to American law enforcement to save his own life. When this story broke years later, thanks to investigative journalist Jake Adelstein, it caused a massive scandal in both Japan and the United States. It violated every code the Yakuza supposedly lived by. The betrayal was so profound that it made his position within the Yamaguchi-gumi completely untenable. In 2008, Kenichi Shinoda, the head of the Yamaguchi-gumi, had enough. He officially expelled Goto from the syndicate, not for his violence, but for the dishonor of collaborating with the FBI and for the negative attention he brought. Goto was forced into retirement, and he later became a Buddhist priest, of all things. This story is one of the most insane tales in modern organized crime, a saga of brutality, betrayal, and a shocking deal with the feds that exposed the hypocrisy at the heart of the Yakuza's code of honor. Sometimes it's not the rise, but the fall that tells the most interesting story. The case of Shigeharu Shirai is a perfect example. He wasn't a top-tier godfather of the entire Yakuza, but he was a high-ranking boss within the Kodokai, the powerful faction running the Yamaguchi-gumi. His story isn't about building an empire. It's about the slow, pathetic decay of the old-school Yakuza world and how it can all unravel because of one stupid mistake. He was a man who represented a bygone era, and his capture was symbolic of its end. Back in 2003, Shirai was allegedly involved in the murder of a rival gang leader in Japan. He was a mid-level boss, an enforcer, part of the machinery of Yakuza violence. Facing a murder charge, he did what many gangsters do. He ran. Shirai fled Japan and disappeared completely. For over a decade, he was a ghost, a fugitive on the run, presumed by many to be dead or living under a completely new identity somewhere in Asia. He managed to stay off the grid for an incredibly long time. Shirai ended up in Lopburi, a quiet, rural town in Thailand. He married a local woman, lived a peaceful life, and kept an incredibly low profile. He was just another old Japanese retiree to his neighbors. He spent his days playing checkers with locals in the park, living a simple, anonymous existence. He had successfully evaded one of the most sophisticated police forces in the world for 14 years. He was home free, or so he thought. The old world was about to catch up with him in a very modern way. Here's where it gets crazy. In 2017, a local in Thailand took a picture of this unassuming old man playing checkers. But this wasn't just any old man. He was shirtless, and the photo revealed his back, which was covered in elaborate traditional Yakuza tattoos, or irizumi. The photo also showed he was missing the tip of his little finger, another classic Yakuza sign. Someone posted the photo on Facebook, praising the cool tattoos. That photo went viral, getting thousands of shares. And wouldn't you know it, that viral photo eventually made its way back to the Japanese police. They saw the tattoos, saw the missing finger, and recognized the face of the fugitive they had been hunting for 14 years. They contacted the Thai authorities, and within days, Shigeharu Shirai was arrested while out shopping for groceries. His downfall wasn't a dramatic shootout or a clever police sting, it was a Facebook post. His story is a perfect metaphor for the modern Yakuza, an aging relic of a violent past, unable to hide from the reach of technology. The year 2015 marks a seismic event in the history of the Yakuza. It was the year the mighty Yamaguchi-gumi, the undisputed king of Japan's underworld for half a century, split in two. And the man at the center of this rebellion was Kunio Inoue. He was the head of the Yamaken Gumi, the fourth-generation leader of the very same powerful faction that past bosses like Watanabe had come from. Inoue was a respected, old-school figure, and he was not happy with the direction the syndicate was heading under Kenichi Shinoda. The tension had been building for years. Shinoda's Kodokai faction was accused of centralizing power, and more importantly, money. They had jacked up the monthly fees that all the subsidiary gangs had to pay to the headquarters, and many bosses felt that the Nagoya-based leadership was disrespecting the syndicate's historical roots in Kobe and Osaka. For Inoue and other leaders from the Kansai region, it was a matter of both money and honor. They felt they were being bled dry to enrich a rival faction. So, in August 2015, Inoue did the unthinkable. He led a rebellion. He and the leaders of about a dozen other factions, including some of the oldest and most prestigious groups in the syndicate, officially broke away from the Yamaguchi Gumi. They formed their own organization, calling it the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi, a direct challenge to Shinoda's authority. This wasn't just a small splinter group. This was a massive schism, taking roughly 3,000 of the syndicate's 23,000 members with them. It was the biggest split since the Yamaichi War in the 80s. Inoue positioned himself and the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi as the true heirs to the legacy of Kazuo Taoka. He claimed they were upholding the traditional Yakuza values of honor and brotherhood that Shinoda's group had abandoned in their pursuit of greed. It was a declaration of war, and the Japanese police braced for a bloodbath. Immediately, a new era of gangland conflict began, with shootings, firebombings, and brawls breaking out across the country as the two syndicates fought for territory and influence. Kunio Inoue's rebellion fundamentally changed the landscape of the Japanese underworld. It shattered the illusion of the Yamaguchi Gumi's invincibility and created a chaotic, multipolar world where allegiances were constantly shifting. While he may have seen himself as a traditionalist fighting for honor, his actions unleashed a new wave of violence and instability. He became the face of a new, fractured era for the Yakuza, proving that even the most powerful empires can crumble from within. Just when you thought the Yakuza world couldn't get any more fractured, it splintered again. The ink was barely dry on the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi's declaration of independence when their own internal politics started to fall apart. And the man who threw another wrench in the works was Yoshinori Oda. Oda was a charismatic and relatively young leader within the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi, serving as the deputy chief and head of his own crew. But he had a radically different vision for the future of the Yakuza. Oda was a protege of Kunio Inoue, the leader of the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi. But he grew disillusioned with the new organization. He felt it was just repeating the same mistakes as the original Yamaguchi Gumi, the same rigid hierarchy, the same burdensome monthly fees, and the same endless, pointless violence. He saw an aging criminal enterprise that was completely out of touch with modern Japan, and was failing to take care of its own members, many of whom were struggling to make ends meet under the harsh anti-Yakuza laws. So, in 2017, just 2 years after the first big split, Oda led his own breakaway faction. He formed a third group, calling it the Ninkyo Yamaguchi Gumi, which translates to the humanitarian or chivalrous Yamaguchi Gumi. This was a wild PR move. Oda claimed his new organization would abandon the corrupt practices of the past. He announced they would not collect monthly fees, would help unemployed members find work, and would focus on the original Yakuza spirit of helping the weak and fighting injustice. He was trying to rebrand the Yakuza for the 21st century. This was a direct challenge not just to the other syndicates, but to the very concept of what the Yakuza had become. Oda held press conferences, gave interviews, and tried to present himself as a social reformer, not a crime boss. He argued that the old ways were dead, and that if the Yakuza didn't adapt, they would go extinct. Of course, the police and the public were deeply skeptical. seeing it as nothing more than a clever marketing gimmick for another violent gang. Oda's rebellion, while smaller than the first split, was significant because it showed just how deep the rot went. The traditional Yakuza model was broken. Younger members were questioning the authority of the old bosses and the fairness of a system that demanded loyalty but offered little in return. Yoshinori Oda, the humanitarian gangster, represents the identity crisis at the heart of the modern Yakuza. His attempt to create a Yakuza 2.0 further fragmented the underworld and signaled that the old codes of loyalty and obedience were well and truly dead. While the Yamaguchi-gumi was tearing itself apart out west in the Kansai region, the criminal underworld in Tokyo was a different story. It was dominated by another old, powerful syndicate, the Sumiyoshi Kai. And for decades, the man keeping that massive organization together and maintaining a fragile peace in Japan's capital was Shigeo Nishiguchi. He was the opposite of the new school rebels. He was a throwback, a long-serving boss who understood that stability was more profitable than chaos. Nishiguchi became the 6th president of the Sumiyoshi Kai in 2005. The same year, Shinoda took over the Yamaguchi-gumi. But their leadership styles couldn't have been more different. Where Shinoda was aggressive and expansionist, Nishiguchi was a consolidator. The Sumiyoshi Kai is structured more like a federation than a strict pyramid like the Yamaguchi-gumi. The various affiliate bosses have more autonomy. Nishiguchi's job was to act as a chairman of the board, managing egos and mediating disputes to keep the federation from flying apart. Under his leadership, the Sumiyoshi Kai maintained its iron grip on Tokyo's lucrative underworld rackets, the entertainment districts of Shinjuku and Ginza, construction and finance. Nishiguchi was known for his political savvy and his ability to maintain the delicate balance of power. He kept his organization out of the kind of high-profile, bloody conflicts that plagued the Yamaguchi-gumi. He understood that open warfare was bad for business and brought too much police attention. His reign was one of relative quiet and immense profitability. But don't mistake quiet for legitimate. The Sumiyoshi Kai under Nishiguchi was just as deeply involved in transnational crime as any other major syndicate. They were so effective at operating on a global scale that in 2011, the US Treasury Department, under an executive order from President Obama targeting transnational criminal organizations, placed sanctions directly on the Sumiyoshi Kai and on Shigeo Nishiguchi himself. He was officially designated as a global threat, alongside leaders of the Russian mob and Mexican cartels. Nishiguchi represents the old guard of Yakuza leadership, a boss who managed to hold his empire together through diplomacy and a deep understanding of the underworld's political landscape. He successfully kept Tokyo's criminal world consolidated while his rivals were self-destructing. He stepped down in 2014, but his long tenure as the Don of Tokyo shows a different path of Yakuza leadership, one based on stability, discretion, and the quiet accumulation of power, a model that proved incredibly resilient even in the face of international pressure. So there you have it. From the post-war chaos exploited by the Ginza tiger Hisayuki Machii to the empire building of the bear Kazuo Taoka and the modern-day civil war sparked by Kenichi Shinoda's iron-fisted rule. Each of these 10 bosses represents a different chapter in the evolution of the Yakuza. They were brutal enforcers, corporate raiders, political fixers, and rebels. They transformed small street gangs into multinational criminal corporations that became deeply embedded in the fabric of Japanese society. They were the architects of an empire of crime. Their legacies are complex and contradictory. They built empires, but also sowed the seeds of their own destruction. The ruthless ambition of men like Shinoda and the shocking betrayal of a boss like Goto fractured the underworld and shattered the myth of Yakuza honor. The rise of reformers like Oda and the quiet downfall of fugitives like Shirai show an organization in crisis, struggling to survive in a world that has left it behind. The era of these larger-than-life godfathers is fading, replaced by a more fragmented and desperate criminal landscape. The world these men created is still very much alive, but it's a shadow of its former self, weakened by internal strife and relentless pressure from law enforcement. The story of the Yakuza is far from over, but the Age of Legends is certainly coming to a close. What a wild and brutal history. It really makes you think about the nature of power and the fine line between order and crime. The world these guys navigated is just fascinating.